putting a very large tariff on chips and semiconductors.
And today, the president teased the tariffs on semiconductors that could be set as soon as next week. Those tariffs could be between 200% and 300%.
The good news for companies like Apple is if you're building in the United States or have committed to build, without question committed to build in the United States, there will be no charge.
Last time Trump tried tariffs, and so the implication is that if you bring across a semiconductor inside a computer, it'll get no tariff, but if you pluck it out of the computer, it'll get 300%. None of this makes sense, Steph.
Trump has just dropped a bombshell, 200 to 300% tariffs on semiconductors. His message is clear: build chips in America or pay the price. It sounds bold, even historic. But here's the problem. This gamble isn't backed by reality. You don't just snap your fingers and conjure billion-dollar fabs out of thin air. They take years, sometimes decades, and trillions in investment. And while Trump waves the tariff stick, the U.S. quietly depends on the very countries he's trying to strong-arm. At the top of that list, Canada. From the germanium mined in British Columbia to the oil and uranium powering America's chip plants, Canada isn't just a neighbor, it's the lifeline. If Ottawa pulls even slightly on the thread, Washington's plan begins to unravel. And what happens next could reshape the entire trade war battlefield. Like and subscribe, and stay tuned, because this story is only just beginning. Trump's tariff threat was not a small gesture. It was an earthquake. Announcing a 200 to 300% duty on semiconductors, the message was blunt: relocate production to the U.S. or get crushed by the tariff wall. For his supporters, it looked like decisive action, a president finally putting America first. But beneath the sound bites and applause lines, the cracks were already visible. Because tariffs are not factories, and slogans are not supply chains. Semiconductor manufacturing is unlike anything else in modern industry. You can build a car plant in 3 years. You can set up a textile mill in 2. But a state-of-the-art semiconductor fab? That's a 10-year marathon. It requires specialized equipment, trained engineers, flawless clean rooms, and billions upon billions in upfront capital. Even Taiwan and South Korea, the titans of this industry, took decades to master the process. Trump's plan assumed companies would simply shift gears in months. The reality is brutal. The U.S. cannot flip that switch. And then comes the supply chain dilemma. Chips don't materialize in isolation. They rely on a web of raw materials: gallium, germanium, cobalt, nickel, graphite. Some of these are mined in China, others in Africa, but one name keeps reappearing in the data: Canada. The U.S. has almost no domestic germanium production. The only facility in North America capable of producing germanium at scale sits in Trail, British Columbia. That smelter employs about 1,500 people and is critical not only for consumer electronics, but also for defense systems, satellites, and advanced radar. Washington can shout about tariffs all day long, but without Canadian germanium, the dream of a made-in-America chip supply chain collapses instantly. And germanium is just the beginning. Ontario is home to some of the highest-grade nickel reserves in the world. Nickel is essential for defense applications, electric vehicle batteries, and the specialized alloys used in chip manufacturing. Ottawa knows this leverage well. In fact, Canadian policymakers have been accelerating approvals for new mining and refining projects precisely because they see what's coming. The U.S. demanding, pressuring, and leaning harder than ever before. Prime Minister Mark Carney has been anything but passive. His strategy has been one of patience and positioning. Canada isn't meeting Trump's tariffs with panic, it's meeting them with projects. In British Columbia, more than $10 billion is being funneled into new mineral and energy developments. In Ontario, Premier Doug Ford is championing a Made in Ontario push, ensuring Canadian resources are branded, tracked, and kept from being quietly siphoned south without acknowledgement. This is not just about economics, it's about national pride. But while Canada tightens its grip on critical minerals, the U.S. finds itself in a bind over timing. Companies like Intel and TSMC may be planning fabs in Arizona and Ohio, but those projects won't be finished until the 2030s. In the meantime, America must import, and every import comes with a bill. Trump's tariffs, intended to force relocation, risk backfiring by raising costs before alternatives exist. That means higher prices not only for electronics, but for defense contractors and AI companies dependent on specialized chips. The carrot and stick model Trump pitched, lower tariffs if companies commit to building in the US, sounds clever on paper. But the stick comes years before the carrot bears fruit. Ford Motor Company already estimates it will face $1 billion in tariff costs under the new package. Multiply that across industries, and you begin to see the scale of disruption. And yet, the real danger isn't just industrial costs, it's geopolitical exposure. Trump has framed his tariff war as a way to box out China. But here's the uncomfortable truth. China still controls 60 to 70% of rare earth mining and nearly 90% of global refining capacity. Beijing has already tightened export restrictions on gallium and germanium. That means America, instead of reducing its dependence, could end up caught between two gatekeepers, China on one side, Canada on the other. This is where Carney's playbook becomes deadly effective. By diversifying Canadian trade, strengthening ties with the EU, UK, and Mexico, and pushing forward long-delayed energy and mining projects, Canada is building a shield. It's preparing for a future where Washington leans harder, but finds fewer points of leverage. For decades, America assumed Canada would always comply, always bend when pushed. That assumption no longer holds. And we haven't even touched on energy yet. Because while chips dominate the headlines, the truth is far broader. Every AI data center, every semiconductor plant, every advanced factory needs not just minerals, but power. Lots of it. And where does America get that power? From Canadian oil, Canadian natural gas, and Canadian uranium. The U.S. imports between 3.8 and 4.3 million barrels of Canadian crude oil every single day. It pulls in 8.5 billion cubic feet of natural gas. And nearly 27% of its uranium imports, the lifeblood of its nuclear reactors, come from Canada. These flows cannot be easily replaced. Disrupt them even slightly, and U.S. energy costs spike. Disrupt them significantly, and America's ability to scale chip production evaporates overnight. So when Trump swings the tariff hammer, he is not striking at a weak adversary. He is striking at his most vital supplier. That's the paradox of this whole confrontation. The very neighbor Trump seeks to pressure is the one holding the keys. And Ottawa knows it. Carney knows it. Doug Ford knows it. They're playing the long game while Washington plays theater. But that wasn't the whole story. Because behind Canada's leverage lay another player ready to escalate the conflict even further, China. China is the ghost haunting every move in this trade war. For decades, Beijing quietly built a stranglehold on rare earths and critical minerals. While Washington debated tax cuts and campaign slogans, China bought up mines, built refining capacity, and cornered the global supply chain. Today, 60 to 70% of rare earth mining is Chinese. 90% of global refining flows through Chinese facilities. And when Beijing decides to tighten the tap, the shockwaves hit instantly. That's exactly what happened with gallium and germanium. In 2023, China restricted exports. Prices jumped. Western industries scrambled. And America discovered just how vulnerable it was. Fast forward to Trump's 2025 tariffs, and the same dynamic looms even larger. Washington cannot isolate itself with tariffs when its tech backbone depends on materials from its two most difficult partners, China and, increasingly, Canada. Here's the irony. Trump's plan was designed to weaken China's leverage. Instead, it risks amplifying it. Semiconductor firms forced to pay steep tariffs may look for cheaper alternatives, but the raw material bottleneck doesn't change. If China and Canada both control the choke points, then tariffs simply drive up costs without fixing dependency. And Canada has been anything but passive in this equation. Prime Minister Mark Carney has pursued a strategy the U.S. never expected: quiet diversification. Instead of leaning harder on Washington, Ottawa is broadening its base. Deals with the European Union and the UK give Canadian resources a secure outlet. Trade with Mexico ensures North American integration doesn't mean U.S. dominance. And Asia is quietly opening its doors. India, South Korea, and even Vietnam are increasing Canadian mineral imports. This diversification changes the power balance. America can no longer assume Canada's survival depends on U.S. access. Instead, Washington faces the uncomfortable reality that if it pushes too hard, Canada has other buyers. Trail's germanium doesn't need to flow south. It can flow east or across the Atlantic. Ontario's nickel doesn't have to be refined for Detroit. It can be shipped for European defense industries or Asian battery makers. Carney has effectively given Ottawa escape routes. But it's not just minerals and trade agreements. Energy remains the foundation of Canadian leverage. The U.S. dream of reshoring chip production collides with its own rising energy demand. Every fab consumes massive amounts of electricity, water, and heat. Those needs are growing as AI data centers multiply. But America's domestic energy grid is already strained. Rolling blackouts in California, grid instability in Texas, nuclear reactors aging out without clear replacements. Enter Canada. Every day, millions of barrels of Canadian oil cross the border. Pipelines deliver the gas that heats U.S. homes and powers industry. And the uranium fueling America's nuclear fleet? Over a quarter comes from Saskatchewan. These aren't luxuries, they are essentials. Remove them, and the U.S. economy grinds to a halt. Raise tariffs in retaliation, and Canadian producers simply redirect exports to Europe or Asia, where demand is surging. That's why Trump's tariff gamble looks less like a masterstroke and more like a trap. He framed it as leverage. But the deeper you examine the numbers, the clearer it becomes. Canada is the one holding leverage. It is Washington, not Ottawa, that risks isolation. And the fallout is already hitting ordinary Americans. Consumers are paying the price, literally. Clothing that once sold for $6.98 now costs $10.98. Shoes are up 40%. Cars are 4 to 8% more expensive. Every time tariffs pile up, the burden lands on the shopper at Walmart, the family at the grocery store, the worker trying to buy a new pickup truck. Trump can sell the tariff war as a patriotic struggle, but the bills piling up in households across America tell a different story. The corporate side is no better. Ford's estimated $1 billion in new tariff costs is not an outlier, it's a warning. Other automakers face similar hits. Electronics firms are drowning in rising input prices. Even defense contractors quietly lobby Washington, warning that cutting off Canadian minerals could jeopardize weapons production. Tariffs designed to protect America are instead weakening its industrial base. Meanwhile, Canada is leaning into nationalism. Doug Ford's Buy Canadian movement is gaining traction. Labels are proudly stamped with origin guarantees. Ottawa has slapped 25% retaliatory tariffs on U.S. goods, making sure Washington feels the pressure in return. And the Canadian public, far from panicking, is rallying behind the message of independence. What began as Trump's show of strength is morphing into Canada's show of unity. This unity matters because it changes the psychology of trade conflict. Trump counts on division, on companies lobbying their governments, on citizens panicking about job losses, on neighbors begging for relief. But in Canada, the opposite is happening. Unity is giving Ottawa confidence to hold its line, to resist short-term pain in exchange for long-term strength. That makes Canada a much tougher opponent than Trump anticipated. And the clock is ticking. Every month that passes without domestic U.S. fabs coming online increases the strain. Every new tariff compounds inflation. Every Canadian project that reaches completion shifts leverage further north. The longer this drags on, the more Washington finds itself boxed in, not leading. The real danger for Trump isn't just higher prices or strained alliances, it's credibility. The 300% tariff headline made him look tough. But if the policy collapses under its own weight, it risks exposing him as reckless. That's the political cost. The economic cost is already visible on store shelves. The strategic cost is Canada stepping into a role it has long avoided, power broker of North America. So here we are, Trump betting everything on tariffs, and Canada holding the very keys America needs most. The White House talks about dominance, but the numbers tell a different story. U.S. factories can't be built fast enough. Raw materials are locked up north of the border, and ordinary Americans are the ones footing the bill. Every pair of shoes, every gallon of gas, every car rolling off the lot carries the hidden price of this trade gamble. The bigger question isn't whether tariffs will hurt. It's how long Washington can endure before the weight of its own strategy collapses inward. Canada has leverage. China has control. And the U.S.? It has headlines, but little else. If you found this breakdown helpful, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and keep watching, because the trade war unfolding now is only the beginning.